Hi, I'm Evelyn Samuel, the author of Super Easy Study Guides. And today I am going to give you some valuable assistance on answering exam questions taken from my study guide. I would like to discuss the theme of social responsibility from a top grade essay, which is an important underlying theme in the play and a very important exam question. Question: discuss the theme of social responsibility. Discuss the theme of social responsibility. One may argue that the play An Inspector Calls focuses more on themes and social issues rather than plot. Priestley writes very passionately to reinforce his socialist message and the damaging aristocratic capitalist message of the Edwardian era. He employs various dramatic techniques and strategies like tension, suspense, conflict, entrances and exits, beginnings and ends, and linguistic devices to pioneer a new morality in politics. He uses these as a vehicle to convey his ideas about social responsibility. Most of the characters have a very skewed and narrow view of the theme of responsibility. Mr. Burling, a careful construct of the aristocratic capitalist class of the Edwardian society, is portrayed as an avaricious, pompous, and ignorant businessman. He describes himself as, quote, a hard-headed businessman who we see only cares about making profit and making sure that, quote, our interest and the interest of capital are properly protected. His capitalist selfish message of, quote, a man has to make his own way and take care of himself and his family, is conveyed to Gerald and Eric, and at this opportune moment the doorbell rings and the inspector enters, creating a conflict of ideas between the inspector and Mr. Burling. He also uses animal imagery, quote, being mixed up together like bees in a hive. He also uses animal imagery, quote, being mixed up together like bees in a hive to reinforce his distaste for socialist ideals. There is a stark contrast between the capitalist belief of Mr. Burling and the socialist belief of the inspector. Priestley uses the inspector to bring about social change in the Edwardian pre-World War I era. Priestley uses dramatic irony to highlight Mr. Burling's belief, said with such confidence and conviction, that the Titanic will not sink and that the World War I will not happen, which all prove to be wrong. Priestley deliberately creates a negative impression of Mr. Burling and his ignorance to intensify his distaste for the capitalist social climbers like Mr. Burling, who refuse to accept responsibility. Hence, Priestley tries to convey a message of social mobility and responsibility through his godlike construct, the inspector, who is authoritative, level-headed, and not threatened by the Burling's social status. He uses harsh and blunt questioning techniques and forces the Burlings to admit to their role in Ava Smith's death. However, Mr. Burling refuses to accept responsibility, describing it as, quote, awkward to have to accept responsibility for everything that happens to everybody. The character of Mrs. Burling is carefully molded by Priestley to portray her as an obnoxious, self-indulgent, egotistical product of the aristocratic capitalist class. Quote, a rather cold woman, clearly depicts Priestley's dislike of her. Mrs. Burling is a social snob and firmly believes that her responsibility is to arbiter and ensure appropriate behavior patterns of her family and public morality. Her prejudices about behavior are revealed or exposed when she insists that the father of Eva Smith's child should be publicly scorned and that the girl had only herself to blame, further claiming that Eva Smith was not deserving of help, even though she was. Yet she is deceivingly portrayed as a woman responsible for helping the poor who deserve it. Ironically, Gerald displays a collective responsibility when he rescues Eva Smith, yet he goes on to commit the same offense he saves her from. He is cut from the same cloth as the Burlings and refuses to accept responsibility. He fails to change at the end of the play, ready to continue his life as before. Sheila is the most willing to fully accept her responsibility for her actions. She shows genuine remorse and is prepared to atone for her errors. Eric, too, acts in quite a responsible way when he accepts responsibility for Eva Smith's pregnancy. And although he stole money and gave her, he did not totally abandon her. Sadly, although goaded by the inspector, not everyone is prepared to accept personal responsibility in Eva Smith's death. Priestley exposes how the prejudices of class, wealth, power, and greed can have a tremendous effect on people's stance in relation to social responsibility. Sheila and Eric, the younger generation, was more Priestley's vision for the future. He wanted the younger generation to become socially mobile and hoped that they will bring about the social changes for the proletariats. He yearned for societal shifts, used them as a vehicle to pioneer equality and better working conditions, and to break down the barriers that existed between the avaricious capitalist class and the poor socialist class. The words responsible and responsibility are used by most characters in the play. The inspector wants everyone to share responsibility in Eva Smith's death and tells them bluntly, quote, each of you helped to kill her. He is talking of collective responsibility. Quote, there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths. The inspector also talks about how, quote, everyone is part of one body. He is propounding Priestley's socialist views, who wanted the characters to develop a social conscience and to embrace a collective responsibility. He warns them that if they ignore their responsibility, they will be, quote, taught in fire and blood and anguish. If injustice and inequality persist, then they will be answerable to God. He uses a missionary tone and vociferously thunders out Priestley's political message, and the inspector's prophetic oratorial style confirms his omniscient godlike status. Thanks for watching, and if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up, share and subscribe. My super easy study guides have lots of information and exam help on An Inspector Calls. It's now on Amazon to purchase. Thank you.